of Business is a statement by Kate Forbes on the Logan review in the technology sector. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Kate Forbes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Coronavirus is first and foremost a crisis of public health, but it has also emerged as the defining economic challenge of our time. Its impact is already devastating and will continue to unfold over the coming weeks and months. The Scottish Government tackled the immediate crisis head-on. We moved swiftly to inject £2.3 billion into the economy, preserving businesses, protecting jobs and providing new opportunities for reskilling. Today's publication of the Programme for Government marks the beginning of a new phase of government action, one in which we look beyond crisis management to Scotland's economic future. Over the last few months, through necessity, we have seen businesses embrace new technologies at a pace and at a scale that would normally have taken years. The Chamber will be as proud as I am that so many chose to pivot their operations to serve our NHS, innovating to save jobs and lives. What we're seeing is a blurring of the distinction between tech and the traditional. The everyday economy is striving to maintain productive capacity, just as our most inventive tech minds seek to ignite innovation in sectors as diverse as finance, healthcare and tourism. The lesson is clear. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, there will be an acceleration in the global trend towards innovation-led economies. Scotland has nothing to fear from that future. Few nations do innovation and ingenuity as well as we do. But it does mean that our recovery cannot be built purely on the restoration of the status quo. What we require is economic renewal. That means moving with vigour towards a high-tech, low-carbon economy, an economy that creates high-value jobs and harnesses the power of technology as a force for social and economic good. To realise that vision, we need to catalyse our most innovative emerging sectors, ensuring that they maximise both their individual potential and their capacity to drive growth and job creation across the whole of the economy. That's why in July, the Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Fair Work and Culture announced a new £38 million package to support high-growth, early-stage businesses. And it's also why, earlier in this summer, I invited Mark Logan to conduct a review of Scotland's tech ecosystem. Mr Logan, as the Chamber will know, brings a wealth of experience accumulated through 30 years of building Scottish startups that perform on a global stage. This culminated in the success of Skyscanner, which, to this day, remains one of the most significant European tech unicorns ever created. He's widely respected across industry as an investor and advisor, and is passionate about creating an ecosystem that provides a new generation of tech talent with the opportunity to replicate his success. And I'd like to put on record my sincere thanks to him for his time and his dedication to this review, which was published last week. Seldom have we seen a report attract such universal acclaim, with key figures across business, technology and academia endorsing it as potentially transformational. And that is with good reason. It's a work of intellect and ambition, with 34 detailed recommendations laying down a challenge to government, to universities and to industry across the key themes of talent, infrastructure and funding. Mr Logan defined a clear and simple purpose for the ecosystem: to produce a consistent stream of tech startups that reach sustained profitability, including a significant proportion that do so at scale. He dismisses complacency with a sober analysis of Scotland's current performance. Yes, we have had some high-profile successes, but that must not obscure the fact that too few of our best startups and university spin-outs succeed over the long term. That's costing us in growth, jobs and tax revenues for reinvestment in a better Scotland. And the report goes on to explain the differences between post-tipping point ecosystems such as London and Silicon Valley, which achieve a critical mass of investable startups, capital and talent, and high-potential pre-tipping point tech hubs such as Scotland. The review's objective is to identify the actions necessary to nudge Scotland over that tipping point. And in the PFG, we've committed to a multi-year, multi-million-pound investment to implement the recommendation to establish a national network of tech scalers. These facilities are the report's centrepiece and would transform the quality and the intensity of support available to Scotland's startups. In addition to networking, meetups and the cross-pollination of ideas, they would deliver formal, world-class founder education, potentially secured on a national licence from the best providers in Silicon Valley. These are powerful commitments that will put the wind of Silicon Valley commercial technique into the sails of Scottish ingenuity. Over the next 5 years, we'll also invest in the creation of an ecosystem fund. This fund responds to multiple recommendations and will be used to make strategic investments in the organisations and activities that create the best possible environment for our startups to succeed. Examples include learning from the Finnish model of investing in key tech conferences to attract talent and external capital, programmes to increase the volume of new startups emerging from universities, and extracurricular activity in schools to ignite pupil interest and tackle gender imbalance. We also accept Mr. Logan's view that in the context of the pandemic, we need to do more to help people get the digital skills necessary to enter high-value employment in the tech industry. To that end, we are actively considering how immediate action could be taken through the recently announced Training Transition Fund. The review sets out proposals for a series of radical interventions across the education system as it relates to the teaching of computing science and related disciplines. But a hallmark of the review's quality is its refusal to engage in oversimplifications. Mr. Logan acknowledges that these are challenges that can only be met with the investment of significant time, energy and resource. He places a mutual obligation on government, educators and industry to work together to deliver progress. So while we may differ on some points in the implementation of these recommendations, we do not shirk from the overall challenge. To paraphrase Mr. Logan, the government is prepared to do its part in, and I quote, bringing to life the inherent magic of software development. Indeed, I'm pleased to confirm that the Deputy First Minister is fully engaged with the report and has already held discussions with Mr. Logan about next steps. Presiding Officer, in such a short statement, it's only possible to offer a snapshot of what is a very detailed and inventive analysis. There are further recommendations on matters as diverse as improving startup infrastructure in universities, collaboration with investors and more effectively harnessing the strategic value of the Scottish diaspora. That is why, in line with Mr. Logan's advice, we will establish a formal partnership with the tech industry to drive progress on those recommendations, where a sustained implementation programme will be required to achieve the necessary outcomes. We're working with Mr. Logan to develop this model as a matter of urgency and will make further announcements in due course. But let there be no doubt, the Government will do what it takes to ignite Scotland's rise as a first-class start-up nation. Presiding Officer, it's my hope that members across the Chamber have been as refreshed as I have by the excitement and the optimism provoked by this review. I share that excitement. We have an opportunity here to advance a model of economic development where we don't just back singular programmes for incremental progress, but where we make more systematic interventions that are co-designed and co-delivered with industry, with investors and academia. I've had responsibility for tech from the very beginning of my ministerial career. I've often said that I consider it one of the most exciting portfolios in government. I'm consistently inspired, not just by the community's creativity and imagination, but by their desire to use those gifts for the good of our country. What we have lacked is what Mr. Logan has now given us, a compelling blueprint with which we can channel that collective energy and spirit. I look forward to getting started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. Could members who wish to ask a question please press the request to speak buttons now. And I call Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. And can I agree with her about the value of this excellent report by Mark Logan. It contains some very good ideas about how to sustain and grow this vital sector where Scotland already has a strong track record? And can I welcome the recommendations in particular on how to better attract investment into new start-up companies, which has been a challenge for as long as I can remember as having economic debates in this chamber, which is quite a long time. Deputy Presiding Officer, this has always been a feature. How do we better support and nurture our homegrown talent? But can I ask the Cabinet Secretary about the issue of education? Because according to the latest statistics, between 2017 and 2018, the number of computer science students in our high schools fell from 4,476 to 4,099. But more worryingly, in a much longer period, in the 10 years from 2008 to 2018, the number of computer science teachers fell by nearly 25%, down from 766 to 595. So can I ask what practical steps are being taken to try and reverse this concerning trend in our schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for both those questions and the spirit in which they were asked. In terms of the value of the report, Murdo Fraser talks about the need to attract investment. And one of the fascinating elements of the report is the comment that it's not necessarily the availability of investment that's at fault. There's public and there's private investment out there, but it is the steady stream of investable propositions and taking startups through the various levels of growth so that they emerge as successful large companies. And that's what we will seek to do with the tech scalers that we'll invest in. In terms of education, he's right to comment that education is a core element of this. Now, we have taken steps in the last few years, like many governments around the world, in order to ensure that computing studies is part and parcel of the curriculum. Part of the challenge is, of course, ensuring that there are sufficient computing science teachers when the pace of change in the tech industry is extremely quick and there are lots of attractive career options for those that have done computing science at university. Of course, when it comes to our STEM strategy, we've taken significant steps to boost the number of people going into STEM teaching in the first place, including computing. And the obvious example there is the bursary that is offered of £20,000 for career changers to train to teach them. But the report highlights that at its core is the need to inspire pupils to continue with computing science and to inspire teachers to recognise the exciting job opportunities for their pupils. So the recommendations in the report around how we enthuse and we inspire in order to attract more youngsters and also to attract more teachers, I think is part of the agenda that we'll be taking forward.
Thank you very much. I call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. We seem not to have sound from Rhoda Grant. Perhaps we'll take Kenneth Gibson next and we'll come back to Rhoda Grant when we can. Kenneth Gibson.
Officer, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement. The Logan Review makes clear that Scotland's high-tech startups must meet the standards of global best practice to be competitive. And the Cabinet Secretary clearly doesn't want to see Scotland's role primarily as one of nurturing new high-tech companies, anticipating that many will likely relocate elsewhere in time, as has happened so often in the past. So, how does she plan to develop technology clusters that will grow and be sustainable here in Scotland? And what support, practical and financial, will be made available to enable that to happen?
Cabinet Secretary.
I agree with Kenny Gibson's analysis that what we don't want just to do is to nurture high-tech companies that leave and relocate. And COVID-19 has shown us that businesses, particularly tech businesses, can successfully operate and continue to grow remotely. And so my hope is that the implementation of this new report for startups to flourish and grow means that businesses will stay in Scotland. There's 2 points in direct answer. The first is that the report doesn't overly prescribe the development of clusters. Instead, it provides the support and mechanisms that will enable the industry to grow more generally and then enable subsectors to develop. The second answer, though, is that the Ecosystem Fund that I announced today will be a central point of that support, which will enable us to make strategic investments in organisations and activities that create the best possible environment for our startups to succeed. And in parallel with the tech scalers, my hope is that putting in place the environment and the education will mean that we have highly successful companies at a far faster startup rate.
Thank you very much. I now call Maurice Golden to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Earlier today, the First Minister said that the Logan review would be implemented in full. Recommendation 18 of the review is for a reduction in intercity rail travel costs. Can I ask when, by how much, who will fund it, and what the total cost will be?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, as I said in my statement, we have accepted Mark Logan's analysis and we have accepted the need to implement the recommendations. Now, in terms of the substance of those recommendations, what we want to get to is the same outcome. So the point he makes in terms of intercity travel is the fact that we have two cities, one of which, without offending the other, has become very well known for its startup culture and has produced a lot of impressive tech businesses, and one which probably needs a little bit more assistance. And the point here is to ensure that we aren't just focusing on one city within Scotland, but instead, through the tech scalers, and we've announced 5 locations today, including Inverness, Glasgow, and other cities, that we ensure that the opportunities are spread throughout Scotland rather than concentrated in one wonderful city.
Thank you very much. Rona Mackay to be followed by Alex Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland has a world-beating reputation for leading in computing science and technology. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that collaboration between schools and further education is a major contributor to this?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, and it's highlighted again in this independent report, and it goes to the question that Murd Fraser asked, because inspiring teaching is key to engaging children and young people in the first place, and that's why it's important, as I said at the outset, that the Deputy First Minister has already been in follow-up discussions with Mr Logan. Now, we'll respond to the detail of the recommendations in due course. I only got a copy of the report last week when it was published. We have already refreshed the curriculum to introduce the fundamentals of computing and cyber skills from the earliest years onwards, and we are doing what we can to attract more computing teachers in. But a lot of the best work going on right now is in the extracurricular space, where schools and the tech industry are working very closely together to inspire young people.
Thank you very much. Alex Rowley to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I certainly welcome the report and the Cabinet Secretary's speech. For many years, many employers have said to me, being able to get ICT graduates is very, very difficult. And I have to say, I've often thought, why do we not take the action? So I'm refreshed and excited about this. But can I point out the Child Poverty Action Group recently produced a report which they said found that low-income families were twice as likely to say that they lacked all the resources needed to support learning at home during the COVID. But it's not just at home that there is this digital divide. The Cabinet Secretary talked about igniting schools and pupils' interest in tackling gender imbalance. But the digital divide is also an income imbalance, where people on low income are able to access ICT, access the internet. So can I ask her, what are we going to do about that? And would it not be a good start to have an audit, instruct education authorities to audit every school in the country so that we know what schools have got appropriate ICT and which have not, including teachers?
Cabinet Secretary.
Alex Rowley is absolutely spot on to talk about the digital divide, and that's why it was very appropriate that earlier today, when we set out the programme for government, the First Minister also announced the Connecting Scotland programme, which is focused on reaching 50,000 people that are currently digitally excluded with the hardware they need in terms of laptops or iPads or whatever, and also the digital skills in order to make use of it, which is the challenge that we've seen through the pandemic, where so much has moved online, and yet it's therefore exacerbated the digital exclusion. So I would say that this report has got to go hand in hand with the work that Aileen Campbell and I are doing around digital exclusion. And at a time where he started his question by talking about the difficulties in recruiting tech grads, well, this is a point. If we're to expand the pool of available talent, then we should be working with young people, whatever their background, to ensure they have the skills to go on and have a relatively high-value job in this industry.
Patrick Harvey, to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Technology has immense potential, of course, to help us tackle the climate emergency. So I was a little surprised that the report includes only 2 throwaway references to that subject, one of which is completely meaningless, and the other is used as cover for a request for aviation growth. Is this the inevitable consequence of commissioning a report from someone who made their name from finding clever new ways to flog cheap airline tickets?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I mean, I would agree with Patrick Harvey that high-tech growth is a very effective means to deliver on our low-carbon aspirations. Now, I take his point that that never happens accidentally. It's got to be intentional from the outset. But, you know, even in terms of the potential for something as basic as working from home and accessing work or accessing markets or customers without having to travel and increase emissions by transport, that may seem like a very trivial example, but I think it's indicative of the potential of using tech in order to meet our low carbon aspirations. And with the targets we currently have, we have to use all levers and all resources at our disposal in order to meet our net zero target. I see high tech as a means of improving our productivity and reducing our carbon emissions if we do it right.
Rhoda Grant, to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the report as well. The Cabinet Secretary talked about gender imbalance in tech education, and that's true, but it goes further than that. The report states, in industry as a whole, women found 20% of our businesses but receive 1% of total investment capital. The Scottish Government, Scottish Enterprise should consider creating a specific vehicle to make seed investments in technology startups founded by women to contribute to rebalancing this aberration. Will the Scottish Government accept and implement this recommendation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Rhoda Grant says, it is one of the recommendations in the report to look at how we ensure that there is a reduction in the gender gap in terms not only of going into the workforce and starting a business, but also being able to attract investment. And that's long been one of the Scottish Government's priorities as well. We have long worked to tackle the gender gap in terms of participation in STEM subjects at a much earlier age, so that it then flows through beyond school. And the short answer to her question is that yes, we will look to see how we can work with that recommendation to reduce the gender gap.
Thank you very much. Beatrice Wishart, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As people develop digital businesses, slow internet speeds are hampering opportunities for innovation and transformation. But the promise to deliver superfast broadband by the end of 2021 in the north of Scotland won't be met, and we're now looking at 2023. How will the Scottish Government make sure that rural and island communities, like my constituency of Shetland, are fully included in this blueprint that's going to be taken forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, having visited some very exciting tech businesses in Beatrice Wishart's constituency in the past, and also just slightly further south in Orkney, some of the most exciting businesses that I've seen who are able to operate on a global scale and yet based in some of our islands, for me, is an advert for what the potential is for reducing depopulation using technology. So we've announced today, we announced a few days ago, but it was re-emphasised today, the voucher scheme in particular, to help those who haven't got super fast broadband right now get that super fast broadband. So I recommend that she and her constituents look at that. And of course, we have our objective of delivering super fast broadband to every household in Scotland.
Thank you very much. Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by Michelle Ballantyne.
Cabinet Secretary, I very much welcome on page 39 of the report the suggestion of self-organised tech meet-up points giving free meeting space and resources. And that's clearly part of an across-Scotland approach to creating hubs for entrepreneurs. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what the thought is about how many jobs might be created directly from the creation of hubs across Scotland, particularly those that come out the back end of the funnel that the Logan report refers to, that are permanent international standard jobs that we can keep for generations?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the options or the potential for job creation is enormous. In terms of the tech scalers, we would aim to support between 300 to 500 companies through the Tech Scalers programme, providing that world-class training and mentoring for entrepreneurs in the hope that their businesses then go on to grow and develop and employ more people. So the initial aspiration would be for approximately 50 jobs, knowing that that is a very immediate start that can only grow.
Thank you very much. Michelle Ballantyne, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too welcome this report. I think it's a good commercial guide for the government to take forward. So I want to ask, does the Cabinet Secretary recognise that leaving the EU may actually afford us with greater opportunities to attract the best in global tech talent, given the 4 major exporters of tech graduates, Russia, China, USA and India, are all out with the EU? And will she be looking, as the report recommends, to negotiate national licences with other countries to give our entrepreneurs access to the training materials and resources currently used in places like Silicon Valley? And how quickly will she set to work on that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think one of the things that would make the biggest difference, of course, to attracting international talent is by ensuring that they can actually access visas in the first place. And as the First Minister said earlier, if this was a programme for government and an independent country, we'd certainly start by having a more positive approach to immigrants and attracting the skills and the talent to this country that we need in order to build a successful tech industry and grow the economy. In terms of the second part of her question, in terms of speed, my ambition is to get to work on these recommendations as quickly as possible, knowing that it's not just up to government to implement them, but actually working very collaboratively with industry and academia to ensure that we can make that progress and reap the benefits of what this report has to offer.
Thank you. Willie Coffey, to be followed by Tom Arthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, what plans does the Scottish Government have to support those who have an interest in pursuing a new career in technology and the growing digital sector in Scotland, including, of course, software development skills? And will she consider a more balanced distribution of these tech scaler locations so that the southwest of Scotland is included?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, on the second point, as a Highland representative, I'm always keen that we ensure that there is the support and the investment outside the main urban centres. So that's certainly one of my priorities. In terms of supporting those that want to change their careers, which is particularly acute right now with those that have been adversely affected by the pandemic, we have recently announced the Transition Training Fund, and that will reskill those impacted by COVID-19 and help them to move into paid work in high-growth areas such as technology.
And finally, Tom Arthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Recommendation 16 of the review highlights that the introduction of a Scottish tech visa would be a highly desirable mechanism to attract international talent to Scotland. Will the Scottish Government put forward this proposal to the UK Government? And does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that, with the powers of independence, a tech visa could be a pathway to Scottish and European citizenship for talent in other parts of the UK who seek an alternative to the bleak isolationism of Brexit?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the tech visa, as demonstrated in other countries, has the potential to transform the talent pool available and to ensure that we can grow. So I will be most certainly making that case to the UK government, probably without great optimism that it will lead to any change, because we have long stated that the immigration proposals right now under the UK government are wrong for Scotland. They threaten to cause serious and lasting harm to the tech industry and a number of other important sectors. It's not just me that makes that point, it's also academic representatives and representatives from business. So our demographic and economic needs are not the same as the rest of the UK, and a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate. We will look at how we use elements of that recommendation to ensure that we are attracting talent, but without the levers over immigration, it is a lot more difficult.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on the statement, and we will move on in a moment to the next item of business.
Thank you very much, colleagues. The next item of business is a committee announcement, and I'm pleased to call Bob Doris, convener of the Social Security Committee, to make an announcement on an inquiry into the role of Scottish social security in COVID-19 recovery. I call Bob Doris.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to announce that today the Social Security Committee has launched an inquiry into how Scottish social security might contribute to our social and economic recovery from COVID-19. We want to look at what can be done within the current constraints. We know that the Scottish Government has the ability to top up reserve benefits and create new benefits in devolved areas. We welcome the actions it has already taken before COVID-19, for example, to increase carers' allowance and to create a young carers grant. Now my committee wants to consider how best Scottish social security should respond to the pandemic to best support people either in or out of work. But we have acknowledged that the majority of social security and the main low-income benefits are still reserved to Westminster. This is a constraint on what can be done in the devolved context. Another inevitable constraint in the Scottish Government's very limited borrowing powers, something I know my colleagues in the Finance and Constitution Committee continue to raise. We've all heard about the more radical proposals for social security change, such as a universal basic income or a citizen's income. These will continue to be discussed by our committee, but the aim of this committee inquiry is to focus on less radical changes which could be quick wins. Our remit is therefore to consider how Scottish social security and its part within the broader context of all UK social security should contribute to the social and economic recovery from COVID-19 through support to those in or out of or seeking work, with a focus on deliverable change from 2021 onwards. We want to hear from as many people as possible. As part of our work, we will of course look to speak to the Department of Work and Pensions and the UK Government Secretary of State for work and pensions. Just last week, I wrote to Ms Coffey expressing the committee's disappointment and frustration that our invitation to date had been ignored. Today, the committee received a response to this letter. It focuses on committee engagement with the UK Government at an official level, as opposed to ministerial attendance at our committee. There is more I would like to say about that, but I'll speak to my committee first, and I'll leave it at that for now. Engagement is, of course, key, which is why I have made details of our inquiry available to Parliament here this afternoon. Can I ask everyone, Presiding Officer, please do make your constituents aware of this committee inquiry and encourage them to submit their views. We will be listening. Presiding Officer, thank you for the opportunity to make Parliament aware of our Social Security Committee inquiry.
Thank you very much, Mr Doris. The next item of business is consideration of legislative consent motion 22591 on agricultural bill. Could I call on Graham Day to move the motion on behalf of the Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The question on that will be put at decision time. The next item is consideration of two parliamentary bureau motions. Again, could I call on Graham Day on behalf of the bureau in this case to move motions 22594 on committee membership and 22597 on suspension and variation of standing orders?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And we come to decision time. So the first question is that motion 22591 in the name of Fergus Ewing on legislative consent motion agriculture bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And I propose to ask a single question on the two parliamentary bureau motions. Does any member object? No. No. The question is that motions 22594 and 22597 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the parliamentary bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that concludes decision time. I close this meeting.